With that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to Sheila Eason. She's going to give some of her background, but it's a pleasure to have Sheila back with us. And it's all yours, Sheila.
All right. Thank you, Willie. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, you can hear me good. Okay. So, as I said in the earlier session, I'm always excited to present at this conference. I think I've been presenting for the last 4 years, and so I see some familiar faces in the audience. And for those of you who have attended my sessions in the past, you know I like to make it interactive. And we're going to have a little bit of interactivity in this session, but I want to make sure that I get you as much information as possible because I know conflict is something that you all struggle with, you deal with on a daily basis. And so let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to try to stay put. I like to normally move around, but I know we have some folks joining us online. So this is just a little bit about me. I know this is the HR track, so hopefully you are in good hands because I do have an HR background. I have worked in the field of HR doing various things for the last close to 30 years. And so I'm the founder of a company called Elevate People Solutions. We are leadership development and coaching consultancy. And so I've been doing that for about the last 4 years. I'm also certified through, many of you presumably know John Maxwell. He's a leadership guru. He's written close to 100 books. So I'm certified as a speaker, trainer, and coach through his organization. So let's go ahead and get started. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, first of all, we're going to identify what are some of the common causes of workplace conflict in the workplace. And then we'll talk about active listening because anytime we're doing conflict management, conflict resolution, a lot of it is about listening. Because when two people are in conflict, there's a reason, right? And typically it is associated with a lack of understanding or misunderstanding or misinterpretation. So it's helpful to be able to employ active listening skills. Also, we're going to look at a model that maybe some of you are familiar with. It's called the Thomas Kilmann conflict model. And it looks at 5 different strategies or ways that people typically respond in conflict. And so we'll talk about when it's appropriate to use those strategies. And then finally, we'll look at some de-escalation techniques because I know I have been in situations where I've been either in conflict or where I've been trying to help employees manage conflict. And we all know that it can sometimes become escalated. Emotions can run high. So we'll talk about some strategies for de-escalating conflict. As I mentioned, I love to have my sessions be a little bit interactive. So I'd like to start with having you all share with me, what is a word that comes to mind when you think of conflict? So I'm just going to have you, oh, yeah, I'll give that to you. And just shout it out. When you think about conflict, what comes to mind for you? Irritation. Yes. What else? What was that? It is absolutely uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable for the two individuals or departments who are engaged in the conflict, and it's also sometimes uncomfortable for the person trying to resolve it. What else? Oh, yes. You read ahead in my slides, didn't you? No, I'm just kidding. It is inevitable. The one thing
Tension back here. Sorry. Tension.
Tension. Yes, tension. Absolutely. And the one thing that I was going to say is what we absolutely need to understand about conflict is what the gentleman said. It is inevitable. I don't care how great of a team you have, how collaborative they are, how collegial they are, there will be conflict. And so that's a certainty. And so we'll talk about that. Let's talk about the definition of conflict. What it is a situation where 2 or more individuals or groups, because sometimes we have conflict interdepartmentally or amongst departments, where there's a disagreement or a clash. that results in differing opinions, or is a result of differing needs, opinions, values, expectations, those types of things. Hold on, I have to make this a little bit bigger. Okay. So when we look at some of the causes of conflict, and I'd ask you to add anything that we've missed here, communication. And I would say just about in any conflict that there is some aspect of communication that has broken down. There is a misunderstanding or miscommunication, or someone says something that someone interpreted differently and than what the individual intended. There's different values and priorities. Sometimes you have conflicts within your teams because one person prioritizes a project or a process over what someone else prioritizes it. Resource constraints. I'm sure that many of you can relate to that, right? There's conflict because we don't have a resource. Sometimes there's conflict because we don't have enough staff. And so everyone else is picking up the slack. And so there's conflict. Cultural differences, right? Sometimes it's based on how people were brought up, or just various cultural differences that people experience. Now, this next one is a real big one that, I've worked with organizations with. Role ambiguity. When there is a lack of clarity in terms of what people are expected to do or what they believe they're expected to do, that causes great conflict, right? Because sometimes there's these competing interests. Well, I'm supposed to do this. No, this is my responsibility. Or sometimes it works in the reverse. You're responsible for this, not me. And so it is imperative that if you have that type of conflict, that you sit down with your team members and that you ensure that everybody understands what they are responsible for. Personality clashes, right? Anybody ever dealt with a personality clash? People just don't like each other for whatever reason that is. Change and uncertainty. And I think that the best way to deal with change and uncertainty is just to deal with it head on, right? Anytime there's a change within your organizations, maybe there's a new initiative, maybe there's a new leader that comes in, it's imperative that you are communicating consistently and really over communicating with your teams. Unmet expectations, and then stress and pressure. And we know that, in the last few years, our organizations have been dealing with a lot of stress, right? From the perspective of our employees, depression, anxiety, all of those different types of things. And it spills over into the workplace. So what is the impact of resolved conflict? Well, you see it here. When there is unresolved conflict, and you notice that I didn't say when there is conflict, right? Because the gentleman said it's inevitable. So we can anticipate that it's going to occur. I'm talking about conflict that is allowed to fester. I'm talking about conflict that is unresolved because the leadership, the management is, quite honestly, if you don't mind me saying, turning a blind eye and not dealing with it. And the one thing I can tell you in my HR career that I've seen is oftentimes leaders, managers, supervisors, they will ignore it, hoping that it will go away, hoping that it will resolve itself. And I promise you, it will not resolve itself. So, decreased productivity. It affects employee morale. Employees are not happy when there's conflict, unresolved conflict. It can teamwork. So as I'm going through this list, I want you to really think about in your departments, in your functional areas, where are there conflicts that are unresolved? And then I want you to begin to measure those conflicts against the impacts that I'm going over. Increased absenteeism. Well, who wants to work in a work environment that's hostile, right? Where there's constant conflict. So it is easier, and the research bears this out, it is easier for people to call off of work and say I'm sick, whether they're sick or not. Communication breakdown. When there's unresolved conflict, I've had employees who refuse to communicate with with each other. Anybody ever dealt with that? I'm not talking to that person. And so as the manager, as the leader, you have to help them to resolve that. We're not asking them to be best friends, but when their positions interact and it's required that they communicate with each other, that is the expectation. High turnover, and again, increased stress and health issues. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just read to you a sample conflict. And what I want you to do, I want you to, either partner up or get into teams of 3, and I want you to talk through this. So I will be 53 next year, so my eyes don't work as well as they used to. So I'm going to look at it from this perspective. Maria is a program manager at a residential care facility. And one of her team members, Sam, who is a direct support professional, has expressed frustration about the frequent last-minute schedule changes. Anybody can relate to that, right? Sam feels these changes make it difficult to provide consistent care, to the residents and disrupts their personal life. Maria explains that the changes are often unavoidable due to staffing shortages and emergency situations, but she hasn't had the time to fully address Sam's concerns. During a recent team meeting, Sam openly criticized Maria's management, stating, "You're not listening to us, and it's the residents who are suffering." Other DSPs in the meeting nodded in agreement, but they remained silent. Maria felt blindsided and defensive and responded, "I'm doing my best to keep things running smoothly. If you have a better solution, let me know." Now, Sam has withdrawn from team discussions and is avoiding Maria, while other DSPs appear increasingly disengaged. So what I want you all to do in either groups of 2 or 3 or 4, if that's necessary, I want you, we just talked about the root causes, right? And I'll just go back a slide. These are the common causes, right? And some of you, I think, have the slides, and they are on the OACB website. So what I want you to do is I want you to identify what might be the root cause of this conflict between Maria and Sam. And then I want you to also talk about how this conflict, unresolved, might impact the team dynamics. So I'm going to give you 4 minutes, and you have my phone. Yes. Okay. I'm going to give you 4 minutes to just talk in groups, and I'm going to start my timer, and you may begin. What's the root cause? No, it's right there. I'm gonna snap a couple pictures. Yeah. I'll take a selfie.
Gonna have group share.
Yes.
White show up to the people on.
Absolutely. Okay. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Folks are in a breakout session having a discussion about conflict. One minute. 1 minute. All right, if I can have everyone's attention. If I can have your attention, wave at me in the back if you can hear me, in the front also, wave. All the way in the back, all right, thank you. And to our online audience, we did not leave you out. If you have any comments that you'd like to add, just pop those in the chat. And our fine gentlemen will make sure that those are acknowledged. Willie's gonna come around and we'll listen or hear a couple from a couple teams here. So what's the root cause of this conflict? And, what can Maria do to, address Sam's concerns and re-engage the team? So let's hear from you. And Willie will come around with the microphone.
We got a mic in the back.
Oh, we do? Okay. Yeah. Oh, hi. All right. Let's hear from you. Okay.
Volunteer back here.
We just said some of the root causes were the change and the stress and pressure. And an idea, just like a first step, would be just to have call a team meeting where everybody involved in it could get together and focus on that one issue instead of, having a meeting about 100 different things, just the one issue, getting feedback from those team members that were stressed out by the problem, and then management taking those ideas and coming up with some sort of solution or backup plan.
Excellent. Excellent. I love that. Pulling the team together, right? Instead of just ignoring it, but making sure that we're addressing the team. We had something up here.
I agree. And we've seen and have done this before where it's actually added is that same concept, but you take the team meeting in a more comfortable setting. So it's not kind of in a sterile conference room, that type of thing.
Yes.
And what it seems to be is maybe some of the team members aren't comfortable speaking out, maybe in a team setting. So sometimes instead of vocal input, if you do it up on like, I don't know, the
Like
flip
a
chart or the
whiteboard,
whiteboards
yeah.
or something, and then just have people go put stuff up. Sometimes people who aren't used to being vocal or speaking in front of people, it gives them a little bit of comfort to put their thoughts out there.
Absolutely.
And then have different team members kind of agree or chat about it.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. I love that. Anyone else?
I got one back here.
Okay.
It seemed like you could kind of point to a couple different options, and one that I thought about was the strain on resources. And maybe the solution there would be kind of getting vulnerable in the team meeting and kind of looking for suggestions from the people at the ground level to kind of get their buy-in to the problem, because it's kind of an unavoidable one.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. I love that. Yes. And I think we have one more.
Yes. Ours was a little bit, out the gate, two of us was like communication.
Yes.
And from my perspective in reading this, I believe Maria could ask a question instead of giving orders. So it sounds to me like people are frustrated because of the consistent or constant schedule changes, which could be based on things that are unavoidable, staff shortages and emergency situations. But instead of putting someone's name on the schedule without talking to them, perhaps asking them a question if they're available, and then let them know why there's a deficit in that space, but having them be a part of the process instead of just, oh, sorry, I made some changes. Like, can you do this shift or that shift? Would that work for you? And even bring that up in the team meeting instead of just changing the schedule and not communicating with people why or what needs to be done.
Excellent, excellent. I love all of these ideas. And again, as I said earlier, oftentimes we can always tie a conflict back to some type of communication breakdown, whether it's a lack of communication or, as I often call it, corrupt communication. But yeah, so thank you all for participating in that. So I just want you all to kind of assess where you are today, evaluating your comfort level with addressing conflict. So you all are, leaders, managers, supervisors, team leaders, all of those positions. And I'm not going to ask you to share, but I want you to do a personal assessment. So on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being I'm very comfortable addressing conflict. When conflict comes, I'm right there, right? I'm in it. Or, right? Or are you somewhere in the middle? So just write it down. Write your number down or keep it in your head. Your neighbor doesn't want to peek over, but write it down because it's important for us to assess where we are. How many of you feel that conflict is good? Okay. Okay, see a few hands. You're like, okay. And how many of you feel that conflict? Oh, I'm sorry. I keep getting out of the sight of our online audience. How many of you feel that conflict is bad? It's just like the worst thing. Okay, I don't see any hands, but I suspect that that's not a true indication of, that people don't think it's bad. So for those of you who said it's good, why do you think it's good? Yes. It can build trust. Absolutely. What else? What makes conflict good? In the back. It implements change. And I saw another hand right in front of you.
Without it.
Yes, you cannot have resolution without it. What else? What makes it good? Yeah.
I didn't say it was either good or bad, because I feel like it's kind of both sometimes.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. It can be. For anyone who wants to comment, why is conflict bad? Anyone who thinks that is bad, what makes it bad? It's emotionally charging. Absolutely. It's draining. It drains our emotions, right? So I believe the conflict is neither good nor bad. It properly managed, and this is according to Kenneth K, it's absolutely vital, as we heard already, because without conflict, we can't get resolution. But with conflict, we can find a better solution. We can find a better way. And if we look at conflict from that perspective, then we won't necessarily shy away from it. And yes, it is emotionally charging, but I'm going to talk to you about some ways to hopefully make it less emotionally charging for you. But again, it's neither good or bad, but it is vital. And it's vital to the health of our organizations. And as a gentleman said earlier, Max Lucado said, it is inevitable, but combat is optional. So conflict we're going to have, but when you have two individuals or two departments or whomever who is engaged in conflict and it becomes combat, that is where it becomes destructive. And that is what makes it a bad thing. That's what makes people run away from it, when it becomes combative and emotions are running high and people aren't able to manage their emotions. So let's talk about that. Oh, did you like that cute little baby? Isn't he cute? So let's talk about active listening. And as I mentioned in the beginning, active listening is crucial for conflict resolution. It's the process of focusing, giving people our undivided attention, making sure that we are listening, we hear them. We're not just hearing words, but that we understand them and that we're responding to what their concerns are. When we talk about effective listening, when we're engaged and we're giving people our undivided attention and we're listening to the heart of what they're saying, we have clearer communication, right? So that corrupt communication that I talked about no longer exists because the communication is clear and we have fewer misunderstandings. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of times when we're in conflict, it's because there's a misunderstanding. Oh, well, I said something this way, the person misunderstood or they misinterpreted what I said. But it helps us to build stronger relationships. And as Christine said, builds trust, right? And more collaborative problem solving. That is where we want to be. So if we look at conflict resolution, conflict management as a problem solving tool, then that changes our perspective about it. So when we look in contrast to ineffective listening, it creates frustration and escalation of conflicts, damaged relationships, lack of trust, missed opportunities for resolution. So active listening is being non-judgmental, where the emphasis is on listening and not solving the issue or the problem. And I'm going to move through these quickly. Is being attentive. It involves listening closely and paraphrasing. And we're going to do a short little exercise in a second where you'll have the opportunity to paraphrase. Active listening is not planning your response in advance. When individuals are talking or speaking and we're planning our response is rolling. We're just waiting for that opportunity for breath to jump in with our response. That is not active listening, and it causes us to misunderstand. It's not daydreaming while we're talking. It's not solving problems or giving advice. So here are some active listening principles. It's restating what the speaker said in your own words to confirm understanding, right? So whether it's you in conflict with someone or whether you're helping two team members to resolve their conflicts, paraphrasing to make sure that we understand is very helpful. So you see an example here. So you're saying that the new process is causing confusion for the team. Is that correct? And then you wait for the person to respond. Nonverbal cues. It's important that we tap into nonverbal cues, using body language and so forth, that we're maintaining eye contact. And then asking open-ended questions. And this is critically important in conflict resolution. Rather than suggesting what the issue is or telling someone what the issue is, it's important that we learn how to ask open-ended questions. So can you tell me more about how this change is affecting your workflow? So if you have an employee who is complaining about a change in process or procedure or something like that, and they're just complaining, this is not helpful, it's limiting my ability to get my job done. Okay, can you tell me more about how this change is impacting your workflow? And so you're asking questions to get more out of them, because quite honestly, sometimes people don't really fully understand why they're upset. And the more questions that we ask, the more we can draw it out of them and then cause them to be reflective about, okay, well, what really is the issue here, so that they can articulate that. I'm gonna skip that. Okay, so the Thomas Kilman conflict mode model. So there's 5 styles for handling conflict, and it's based on 2 dimensions of assertiveness and cooperativeness. And so you see cooperativeness down here, and that's the concern for others. And assertiveness is the concern for ourselves. So I'm going to go through and talk about each one of these styles. And we'll talk also about whether there's a focus on cooperativeness or assertiveness. So competing, there's high assertiveness. So what this is there's a high concern for self and a low concern for others. So this style is focused on a win-win. And when people are focused on a win-win, they want to win at all costs. So if you are helping to resolve a conflict, it's important that you identify it. Are the individuals focused on a competing style? When to use this? If there's quick decision making that is required, or you need to enforce important rules or standards, such as a safety regulation. But this is a style that if it is exhibited in the workplace, you really need to work hard to try to move people away from this competing style, because it is a very destructive style. And this style does not bring resolution oftentimes. Collaborating. So this is where we love to have people. It's high assertiveness, so it's a high concern for self, but it's also a high concern for others. So in other words, the individual is concerned about making sure that their needs are met, but they're equally concerned about making sure that other people's needs are met at the same time. And so this style is focused on a win-win, right? You win, I win, we both win. And doesn't mean that both sides always get everything that they want, but at least each side gets something. There's a compromise. When to use it, if you're dealing with complex issues, long-term relationships, if that is of concern to individuals, then this is a great style to use. So, an example, if you're brainstorming ideas about workflow issues. Compromising. This is another good style, because you see that it's moderate, right? There's moderate concern for myself, moderate concern for others. But this style is focused on that middle ground where each party is giving up something, right? And so that's where the strategy comes in, is trying to get both sides to give up something and to compromise. Both sides have equal power and they're willing to concede. Avoiding. You see that this is low. So this is where people just simply want to altogether avoid conflict. There's a low concern for others, low concern for self. And so this is where people want to sidestep the issue. And perhaps even some of you as leaders in here today, maybe this is where you are, where I'd rather just avoid the issue. Now, when to use this style? If the issue is minor and it can, ultimately be resolved, or just the timing is not right, because that's another area. Sometimes timing is of the essence. And so we need to make sure that we're focused on the right time. Also, if there's more information that's needed, so we shouldn't be so quick to just jump in and try to resolve a conflict if we are lacking information. Sometimes we have to spend that time to get information and make sure we're clear on what each side, what their concerns are. So choosing the right style, the stakes, how important is the issue? And that will help you to determine which style is appropriate. The relationships, thinking about how will this conflict affect long-term relationships. That's another factor to keep in mind. And then how urgently must the conflict be resolved? So if it's really impacting team dynamics, if it's preventing us from being able to move forward and get work done, if it is causing stress amongst the team, distress, people are not wanting to come to work, those types of things, then that means that that conflict needs to be addressed immediately. Okay, so quickly, I'm going to go through this next conflict scenario. And what I want you all to do in your same groups is I want you to decide on one of the styles to use. Which style would you use? So a team working in a developmental disabilities organization is experiencing tension over resource allocation. Two team members, Sarah and James, they disagree about how to use the budget for staff training. Sarah's position, she advocates for allocating most of the budget to training new staff members to ensure compliance with regulatory standards. James's position, he believes the budget should prioritize ongoing professional development for experienced staff to improve client outcomes. This disagreement has escalated to the point where they just avoid each other. They refuse to work with each other, and their teams are beginning to take sides. So as their manager, you need to address the conflict and find a resolution. So which resolution style do you think would be most appropriate for helping Sarah and James work through their conflict? So I'm just going to give you 1 quick minute to have a discussion in your group. So quickly, 1 minute. Which style? All right. Wave at me in the back if you can hear. All right. I know that was a quick minute. It's always amazing to me how quickly an hour goes by. Just quickly, one person or one group, which style do you think is most effective for this conflict?
So we said either collaborating or compromising. So the thought is collaborating. Maybe there is a lot of retention of older employees. And so if you have less newer employees coming in, then splitting it evenly isn't necessarily the right way to go. So kind of looking at it to see what makes the most sense for both parties, and also looking at, what internal resources could be used for new employees that maybe we can provide that training internally, and that is not costing us as much as maybe going outside for other trainings. So
Yes, excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm just going to keep us moving. So now what I want to talk about is some de-escalation techniques for when you're dealing with emotionally charged situations such as conflict. So first of all, maintaining a calm demeanor. So that's for you as the conflict resolver. But also for the individuals who are in conflict. So controlling emotions. It is important to make sure that people involved in conflict are controlling their emotions. There's different techniques you can use. You can use breathing techniques to just get them to calm down. Also using a neutral tone. So, not yelling, not elevating our voice, but speaking softly. Not using aggressive language or blame, because that can incite people. And then staying present, focusing on the issue. And you'll see in another slide where I talk about focusing on the issue, not the person, focusing on the problem, not the person. Because sometimes, we can focus on, well, this person is difficult. Okay, what is it that they're doing? Focus on the behaviors. What are the behaviors that the person is exhibiting that would suggest that they're being difficult? Are they not willing to compromise? Are they not listening? Are they being aggressive in the meeting? Whatever it is. Acknowledging emotion. Some other steps is we talked about active listening. Empathize. Sometimes we have to help people reach a level of empathy. And so when you're working with someone, you can say, hey, acknowledging that. I see that you're upset. I understand that this is an upsetting situation to you. Or I understand that what happened in the team meeting, your coworker yelled at you or, whatever it was. I can understand that that is very upsetting with you. That can bring down the temperature in the room, right? When you validate someone. Avoiding judgment. Acknowledging a person's feelings. And when you acknowledge their feelings, it doesn't mean that you necessarily agree or that you're saying that they, how they feel is correct. But what you are doing is you are acknowledging their right to feel that way. Setting boundaries. And one of the techniques that I do when I'm doing conflict resolution is at the very beginning, I establish ground rules. So anytime I'm working with individuals at the very beginning, and write this down, I didn't put it in the slide. It's important to establish ground rules for how we're going to communicate. We're going to have one person speaking at a time. Each person is going to have an opportunity to speak. And when one person is speaking, you're listening. It's okay if you take notes, but we're not going to interrupt one another. And then you set those ground rules. So I always go in with a list of ground rules myself, and then I ask the parties, is there anything that you would like to add to the list? So setting boundaries, being clear and firm. Let's focus on finding a solution. And I always state that in the beginning, after the ground rules, that our goal here is to find a solution or resolution. And that's what we're going to focus on. And so if you have individuals who are trying to sidetrack and derail the conversation, you have to bring them back to the center. We are here to find a solution. I mentioned this, separate the behavior from the person and focus on actions. Again, what is it that the person is doing or saying or not doing that is causing conflict? And again, not assigning our assessment of their personality flaws. In the interaction, if necessary, there are times when you are in a conflict situation, managing a conflict, where it will be necessary to just end the interaction and maybe say, this is unproductive. I see that emotions are running high. So why don't we take a break? And maybe you say, let's take a half-hour break, or why don't we meet back up tomorrow? But always make sure that you follow up and that you don't, just let it fester and that you forget to follow up, but make sure that you do that. Focus on common ground. And this is another technique when you are managing conflict, is oftentimes in conflict situations, I found that people focus on where they differ versus what they have in common. So if we can focus on what is the common ground. So identify shared interests. What are the mutual outcomes that both parties are seeking? Because it could be a situation where they're both seeking the same outcome. They just have a different perspective in terms of how you achieve that outcome. So let's focus on, okay, you both agree that this is the outcome. This is the direction that we should move. So now let's figure out together how we can achieve that outcome. Use inclusive language, we instead of you or me. That's very helpful, not, just focusing on individuals, and then reframe the issue. Shift the narrative from blame to problem solving. And so that might be another ground rule that you establish in the beginning, is that I want you both to commit to not blaming one another, but let's focus on problem solving. We can still talk about the behaviors that led us to this point. But once we talk about the behaviors, then we're moving from blaming to now problem solving. And I've provided you with like some statements or questions along the way. So like, how can we achieve this together? What do you think needs to be done to get us to this point of resolution? So again, asking questions. Using non-threatening body language. So maintaining an open posture. If it's you in a conflict or you're helping to resolve a conflict, paying attention to body language. Because if you're, talking with someone or you're helping two individuals in a conflict and one or both of them are sitting there like this, you know that they're not present. Remember, I talked about being present earlier. So then we say, okay, Sheila, I noticed that your arms are folded. You seem to be closed off. And it's okay to say this, right? Do you need a few minutes? Or tell me, what are you thinking? What are you feeling right now? And that is perfectly okay to say that. Respect personal space, facial expressions, neutral, maintain eye contact. Okay. Now, when you're doing conflict resolution, always make sure that you reach this stage where you're exploring options, right? So addressing the situation, of course, identifying, the compromise or the next steps, presenting clear options. But if I'm helping two individuals resolve conflict, I'm asking them, what are our options? And it depends on where you're doing this at. If you have a whiteboard or a flip chart or something like that, you can actually put those options on the flip chart or the whiteboard and number them and have, talk through them, and then have the individuals identify, okay, out of these options or these solutions that we've come up with, which one or two seem to be the most feasible? And then you have some conversation about that. And then you narrow it down and be willing to negotiate and have the parties be willing to negotiate as well. I talked about taking a break if needed, especially when you notice that emotions are running really high and people are very upset. Sometimes you may have individuals who are crying. And I'm trying to talk from two perspectives. I'm talking to you from the perspective of you being in a conflict, but also from the perspective of you resolving a conflict. So sometimes you may have someone who's very upset. They may be crying, or they may be very angry. They may be very closed. And so recognize those emotions. And again, when the discussion is becoming unproductive, because you don't want to force someone to continue having a discussion when they're very upset. They're not clear-minded, and it's just not going to be productive. Okay, let's see. All right, I'm going to skip that for now. Oh, wait. No, let's go back. Okay. Here's another scenario for you, and we'll do this really quickly. So in a team meeting at a developmental disabilities organization, two staff members, Alex and Taylor, have a heated argument over task priorities. This goes back to one of the common causes of conflict that we talked about, task and priorities. Alex's perspective wants to prioritize addressing safety concerns at a group home due to a recent incident. But Taylor's perspective is that she insists that the focus should be on updating client documentation to comply with an upcoming audit. the disagreement escalates, raise voices, interruptions, and again, other team members are upset. They're uncomfortable. So what are some of the de-escalation techniques that are helpful in this type of situation? So, and I'm just going to go through these in the interest of time. First of all, we want to address Jamie's frustration. Jamie, I can see that this is very upsetting for you. Let's talk through it calmly, right? So you're putting it out there. You're letting the individual know that we're going to talk through it, but let's make sure we're talking through it calmly. Setting those boundaries. Remember, I mentioned this earlier. Making sure that you, whomever is involved, is maintaining professionalism. If you have someone who is unhinged, yelling, cursing, we're going to put a pause on this conversation. Let's keep the discussion respectful so we can address the issue effectively, right? So this is also managing emotions, and we're setting boundaries. And sometimes I've been in conflict situations where I've had to go keep reminding the parties of the ground rules. We are going to have this discussion in a respectful way. Provide options. I talked about this. So we can offer solutions to Jamie. Jamie, would you like to discuss the rotation, how the rotation works, or explore options for shift swaps with your team, right? And then again, taking a break if emotions are running high. So I'm going to just quickly summarize the key points, and then I'll open it up. We have just a few minutes left for any questions. So we talked about the causes of workplace conflict, miscommunication, differences, all of those things. We talked about active listening principles, techniques like paraphrasing, being mindful of nonverbal cues, and asking open-ended questions. And I cannot stress that enough. That you are asking questions throughout the engagement. We talked about the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode model and determining which style is most appropriate given the particular circumstances. And then we finished out by sharing de-escalation techniques, staying composed, acknowledging other people's emotions, setting boundaries, right? We're not letting people just, hijack the discussion or behave in an unprofessional manner. Using non-threatening body language and providing options. And again, I can't stress enough how important it is to make sure that you get those options on the table. And then you analyze the options to determine what is the best way forward. Okay. And then lastly, I'll mention there are handouts. I think a couple of you may have printed them out, but there are handouts that are on the OACB website. There are additional tools and resources that are out there for you as well to download. And then we will finish up with, are there any questions? Any questions at all? We have 2 microphones. We have probably time for 2 questions. No questions? Going, gone. Okay. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your time and attention.